Thank you, Mark, for coming today and joining us on this hot seat on cybersecurity. We all know that companies out there, we've seen these very large breaches, and that cybersecurity really has a very hot seat right now, as you could say, on it. So what do you want to talk about with high priority data? Is protecting that high priority data such a concern today?
Sure. Yeah, you're right. Cybersecurity is a hot issue. Just a few days ago, we had a major attack on Amazon and Netflix through a DDoS attack. Breaches themselves certainly targets the most notable, but almost every week we're hearing about a new breach. But within the scope of all this attack and protecting yourself, I do believe that not all data is created equal. Mm-hmm. That there is actually high priority data, and there does need to be a focus on that high priority data.
But isn't any hack damaging to a company? Why is there some that are more damaging than others?
Sure. Clearly no one wants to be hacked. Although I will say I was at a Chief Information Security Officer conference last week, and a couple of people there spoke actually about the idea of continuous breach. They were prepared that they were at all times under attack and that they needed to be ready for it. But I do believe that there is a differentiation between that data and that you do need to protect it.
Aren't companies required to report any kind of breach that they have, especially on high priority data like credit cards? Because I know PCI compliance, so
sure.
Aren't they required to do that?
Sure, yeah, and that actually is exactly the point, right, mm-hmm. is high priority data. So if you don't hear a lot of reports about, hey, the salaries of the executives of this company were breached. Why? Because they're not reporting it. But when it comes to something like a high priority data, like credit cards, it is. And clearly, there isn't really a better example of high priority data than credit cards, because that's exactly the thing that we all know, again, I apologize to Target, they are the poster child for this story, but they lost documented $200 million because of that breach before insurance payouts. So it really does speak to the fact that the data like a credit card is much more vulnerable.
So mentioning credit cards, I used to, on the corporate practitioner side, work with a merchant processor.
Yep.
So the entire company and every employee had to go through PCI compliance. Is that not enough?
Yeah, very good point. So if we have compliance, why isn't that enough? And I'm going to reference that same conference I was at last week, where they said, you know what, compliance, nobody brags that they're complying. Compliance is not sufficient. Compliance is the baseline. Actually, when you look at PCI, mm-hmm. PCI rules come out, and 9 months later they're enforced. That's not a bad thing. They can't simply say to companies, here are the new rules, comply with them today. But at the same time, you've got a bleeding edge situation where people are having breaches with new technology, and if the lag time is 9 months, there's no way that compliance is sufficient to meet your needs.
So if PCI compliance is not enough for a company to protect themselves, what are some other things that companies are doing to enhance that security on their side? Sure.
So a couple of technologies that I think, especially when you look at credit cards specifically, that allow you to move beyond compliance and actually present a situation where you do less effort and you get more security, which seems like an oxymoron. But tokenization is one technology that I definitely believe in, and that allows you to remove your systems from scope for PCI, but more importantly from a security perspective, it means that nobody's going to get the data. So to give an idea of what tokenization is, somebody breaks into your home. A burglar gets in your home, suppose you have a safe, most people don't, but say you do. They break in and they get fake jewels. Because your real jewels are in a safe deposit vault in a bank. And that's really the concept of tokenization, is that your actual credit card data is not in your corporation. Mm-hmm. It's in a secure vault protecting it.
Okay, interesting. It's kind of like that PCI Scope. So if a corporation doesn't want to be in scope for PCI compliance, they can reduce that number of touch points of information that's on their systems. Can you explain that difference between PCI compliance and,
Sure.
and reducing your PCI Scope?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I'll give you another analogy. Many of us are at this conference, we're staying at a hotel because we're not local. So we'll go into a bizarro world where your role today isn't that you are here at the conference, but for some strange reason you've been given the task of cleaning all the hotel rooms in your hotel. So let's say there are 300 rooms in the hotel. And you go about the arduous task of cleaning all those rooms. At the end of that time, you're now told, they come back to you and they say, you know what, let me see the cleaner you're using. That's not a sufficient disinfectant. Why don't you go back and use this new stuff and clean all those rooms? So you have been found to lack compliance. You're not compliant. You didn't comply with PCI. That's the analogy of the cleaning of the rooms. You go back, you do the same amount of effort. You've now cleaned 300 rooms a second time. And now you are in compliance. Okay, that's fine, but wouldn't it be better if you didn't have to clean 300 rooms? So a new technology comes out. They put giant vacuums in rooms and disinfectant spraying devices in bathrooms, and now 90% of the hotel doesn't need to be cleaned by hand. It's actually done automatically. So now we're down to what, some 30 rooms that actually need to be cleaned. That's the idea of scope reduction, actually doing less work. And tokenization will not remove you completely from having to comply with PCI, but it does mean you do 270 less rooms, and that's essentially what's happened. The token is in place. PCI does not view a token to be a card, and therefore it's out of scope. The more important thing from true security is that there's no card for a criminal to steal. So just a point of clarification, we use the term encryption, and sometimes people think a token is an encryption. It isn't. So an encryption is taking a number and using an algorithm to be able to prevent a thief from easily being able to grab a hold of it. But in theory, if you had enough of these encrypted numbers and some powerful enough supercomputers and enough time, you may be able to hack that. A token, on the other hand, is not derived from the original value. It's a randomized number. It has no correlation to the actual card number. So there's no way to actually, if you get a bunch of tokens, whether from an external hacker or a friendly internal hacker, you're not going to be breached, and that's not going to result in a reportable event.
So what other business value do companies get beyond just the basic security that you've been talking about?
Yeah. So a few different things that you could certainly think of. When we're dealing with customers, we're seeing that they're either coming to us in one of two conditions. Either they're being proactive or reactive. If I were to break the reactive into two categories, there's those who have failed their PCI audit. And I should probably back up here. I've been throwing out a term that has an acronym, and maybe everybody doesn't know it. PCI, Payment Card Industry. So when somebody, whether a little dry cleaner or a large corporation, says we're going to accept credit cards, they sign a nice long document, and on there it says, I will comply with PCI, which is very significant, the amount of effort that's involved with it. So some of our customers are coming to us and saying, you know what, we're in violation. We didn't pass our audit. We need something to resolve this quickly. So that's a reactive situation. The other really terrible reactive situation is they've actually been breached. And in that case, they want to do something to address that problem. The proactive person is saying, you know what, we want to do the right things to protect ourselves. And maybe they said their motivation is that they want to reduce their PCI scope, right? Maybe they've said that they want to be proactive because they do very much care about security and they want to protect that data for their customers. The compliance and the security do go, hand in hand. So they are complementary. But being reactive is obviously proactive is obviously a much better scenario to be in than being reactive.
All right. Well, thank you very much,
All right.
Mark. It was
Thank you.
great talking to you.